Okay guys, welcome back. So, we've already done TBC changes from Classic, so Classic to TBC, check those videos out if you haven't seen them. We've also looked at pre-raid or pre-Karazhan gearing, so the best you can get from quests, crafting, dungeons, a few Badge of Justice gear, bits like things like that, some exalted reputations. So those presentations are all available on my Google Drive, which, feel free to just download the presentation, or if you want to check the videos out, they're all on my channel. Now we're going to start looking at what you bring to the raid. So if you go druid, what does a feral DPS bring versus a balanced druid? What does a resto druid bring? And we're going to go through all the classes, all the specs, but just each video will be quite short. So I'm aiming for sort of 15-20 minutes, absolute maximum on each class, but that one video will include all the specs as well. So again, thanks for the support everywhere, and especially over on Twitch as well. You guys have been fantastic, keeping me company overnight. It's brilliant. So feel free to follow me, Scottejaye 87 over on Twitch. And for those of you who catch me live over on Twitch or even on YouTube streaming overnight, I've always got a pack of these in my hand, which I can't help myself, quite a fiend when it comes to cards. So in true card fashion, I'll leave you with this. Just make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and then finally, make sure you ring the bell. Ringing the bell so you don't miss out on any videos that I put out on content that you might want to see. So finally, let's go. Okay guys, so you've seen the intro, so you know what we're going to be looking at. So we're looking at sort of the raid viability of each class and what they bring to the raid. So, it may help influence your decision on what class you're going to play in TBC. I'm hoping that that's the case. A little disclaimer that I want to put out there is this may not apply to these top hardcore super speed running guilds, because they'll stack the classes that are just going to get the content done, rather than actually taking a well-balanced group. You've only got to look at classic raids, these speed runners in Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, where they're just stacking warriors and rogues, pretty much not worrying about anything else. So, I just wanted to put that out there. This is for your semi-hardcore guilds, up to probably hardcore guilds, but ones that are not specifically trying to smash the content in 30 minutes, just stacking hunters and warlocks, which you will see happen in TBC when it launches. So we're going to look at the druid and what the druid brings. So just overall druid, we'll get into the specs, but to begin with, just what does the overall class bring? So you've got Fairy Fire, which is very nice in Classic. It's a big DPS boost for everyone. The armor levels on the TBC bosses are higher anyway, so as much armor sort of penetration or reduction as you can get in the raid is obviously brilliant, so that's good. You've got combat res, which is unique to druid, of course. Obviously you've got shamans that can ank, and you've got soul stones, etc., but actually in combat being able to get up a friendly ally, then you're looking at druid is the only person that can do that. So that's definitely not worth overlooking. They've also got innovate, so depending on what spec you are as a druid, depends on how useful your innovate's actually going to be, because if you're a resto druid, you're probably going to use it on yourself, although resto druids are quite mana efficient, so you may use it on a friendly paladin or priest. But if you're a bear tank, your opportunities to actually use your innovate are going to be reduced. You're not going to be able to use it exactly when required. You might have to be clever, and if you've got to move away from a boss, or it's doing a casted AoE, something where you can get out of form and back in quick enough, then but you've got to pick your times. But still, obviously, very, very nice ability. You've also got Cyclone, which is a nice 6-second CC, which it's not on diminishing returns in PvE or anything like that, so you can keep it up indefinitely. Yeah, it's not as good as your banishes or sheeps or traps, because it doesn't last as long. But if you just want to take a mob out of the fight, or even use it as an interrupt, to stop a caster from healing, just quickly cyclone it. If no one else is going to interrupt it, that's a good option. You've also got Tranquility. So Tranquility in Classic is probably a bit lackluster. As a feral druid, you can pop it, but it's not going to do mass amounts of healing. Whereas in TBC, it's actually quite a useful healing cooldown, no matter what spec druid you're playing. So again, it's party wide, so you're going to keep 5 people, or yourself and 5 people alive, potentially through some deadly AoE. So yeah, definitely a nice thing to have. And then you've got the obvious ones, so the fact that you can remove curses. There's only 2 classes that can, that's mages and druids, so you have to be mindful of that. An example would be sort of Ataman, the first boss in Karazhan. You're going to want somebody who can decurse. If you haven't got mages, then you're going to want a druid that can do it, and preferably not a druid tank, because they're not going to get the opportunity. And then, again, the obvious ones, Mark of the Wild and Thorns. So Mark of the Wild, is a nice buff. Thorns is a nice, little bit of damage and threat for the tank. So both of those, you absolutely want, you want one person bringing Mark of the Wild to the raid anyway, just for the extra stats, the extra resistances. But then when we get into the specifics, so if we look at Feral Tank first, so Feral Bear, obviously you can see my Feral Bear just dancing around in the entrance of Alcatraz. So the bonuses to taking, or the advantages, should I say, for taking a Feral Tank to a group would be the fact that they're quite easy to get crit immune. So that's a tank's number one goal should be to be crit immune before you start raiding, or even really doing the harder dungeons. You're going to want to be crit immune, which is only 415 as a druid, because you get 3% from talents, which I'll just show you the talent as well while we're sat here. So it's survival of the fittest, which increases all attributes by 1% per point and reduces the chance you'll be critically hit by melee attacks by 1%. So that's 3% attributes and 3% less chance of being critted. So that's why you need less defense. You only need 415 opposed to warriors and paladins, which need 490. So that's very nice. And the reason I've sort of listed that as an advantage to take in a feral tank is because of, in low levels of gear, it might be quite difficult to get a crit immune main tank, in week 1 when you're going to want to get into Karazhan quickly. So using a feral tank could be advantageous early on. They are also very, very strong tanks. They're just a big meat shield. You can get massive amounts of armor in TBC. You do massive amounts of single target threat. They're not so great on multi-target, obviously, but that you can't have it all unless you're a paladin. Then you probably can, but they're still absolutely solid tanks. You'll see a lot of main tanks and definitely off tanks in all the top guilds, or definitely the top guilds on your server. They'll probably be rolling with a Resto, a feral druid. Reason being, and another good point of having a feral tank is the fact that you can just switch out of bear and into cat when you're not needed to tank, and you can put out respectable damage still, particularly on single target. So it's got that bonus as well. Another one would be Fairy Fire, which we've already spoke about. The fact that a druid in general brings Fairy Fire. Well, as a feral tank, you're just going to keep this up all the time. So if you've got a Resto druid doing it, it could fall off. There could be intense healing going on, and they're having to focus on the healing and not so much on Fairy Fire uptime. At least if you've got a feral tank, you know that it's going to be up 100% of the time. And if it's not, you need to have words with your tank, because there should be no reason not to keep it up 100% of the time. Another one, so a feral DPS could bring this as well, but improved leader of the pack. So your leader of the pack ability, basically the people in your party get 100% chance when they crit to heal themselves for 4% of their max health. So it can only work, only happens every 6 seconds, but odds are you're gonna crit pretty much every, let's say, 8 to 10 seconds maximum. So it's a really, really nice bit of just passive healing if you're in the melee group, and you've got a few warriors, couple of rogues, whatever, that are just putting a good amount of self healing out, which means less pressure for raid healing on your healers. Which I've seen myself in Karazhan, when the melee that are in the group with the druid can more or less either just get away with being hotted or just not healed at all. It is actually really, really strong. So lastly, not probably one that you would think about too much, but Mangle. So Mangle's really good because it don't just it does good damage, threat, increases your threat because you're going to be using Lacerate, which is a bleed, which it buffs, but you're also buffing every person who can benefit from bleeds in the raid. So if you're doing a 25-man raid, odds are you're probably going to have a couple of warriors that have got deep wounds, so you're buffing their damage. You've even got hunters' pets like cats that can get rake, so you're buffing their damage. If you've got a feral DPS in the group, they can drop Mangle from their rotation completely and just focus on shred spamming basically and keeping rip up and getting ferocious bites in where they can. So you that one ability alone is actually going to buff quite large portions of your raid depending on your composition. So I don't think that should be overlooked. It's strong. It's definitely a strong ability. So the only downside is the loss of being able to use some of your key sort of utility cooldowns as easily as maybe other spec druids. So even combat res, you're going to have to time really well or take a big risk on using it, because it's going to take you out bear form. If you're main tanking a boss, it's going to be difficult to use. And the same goes for what I said about your combat res as well. Your innovate as well. It's going to have to be timed really well. And then, Cyclone, more or less, you lose that because you're not going to get much chance to be able to CC. And even Tranquility, unless it's a part of the fight where the whole raid's being hit and you're not, or you're just part of that raid damage, then of course you can use it, combine it with Bark Skin if you want to, so you don't get interrupted. So it's, I'm not saying you're never going to be able to use it, but I would say the ability to be able to just use it on the fly reactively when you may really need it is going to be reduced. Not a negative, not too much of a negative. It is a slight negative, but obviously feral tanks are so strong anyway in TBC that you can sort of do without that, because odds are you're going to have probably a Resto druid in the group anyway who's going to be able to do all those things. But that's tanks specific. There's not a lot of difference between tanks and feral DPS. So we'll talk about feral DPS next. So in cat form, you're a tank on the fly, which I think is really strong. Depending on how you set your talents up as well, you can more or less have a DPS / tanking spec in the one setup. So you can quite viably just quickly jump into bear form to pick an ad up, or if the tank dies and you want to just quickly jump into bear and stop a wipe, you can absolutely do that. It's unlikely you're going to be crit immune, obviously, but still, that's you can't have it all. So it's really nice, really nice. So the other bonuses are you don't really lose your utility, your main druid utility. So you're pretty much free to use innovate and combat res at will. So whenever it's needed, you can just do it more or less straight away. You will be power shifting, so you need to keep in mind of your mana. So have you got enough to jump out and combat res at all times? But that's weaving in mana pots, power shift macros and things like that. So that's just more you managing your mana to be able to use the cooldowns and utility cooldowns when you need them. So same applies to obviously Tranquility, Innovate, Combat Res, all those things you can just use whenever. You bring in Prove Leader of the pack. So if you've got Feral Tank and a Feral DPS, both in different group, 2 different groups in a 25 man, you've got a lot of melee that are doing a lot of self-healing. So it makes them worth bringing. And again, they can keep Fairy Fire up. If you've not got a Feral Tank, the Feral DPS should be the one that's keeping Fairy Fire up. The only downside, so I don't want to just give you all the positives about all of these specs and what they can do. I want to be realistic. I want you to go away with a really good idea on, are you going to get taken to a raid? Feral DPS needs certain things to be able to do exceptional damage. I would say one of those really is having a Shadow Priest in the group for power shifting. There's there's Staff of Nature's Fury, which reduces the mana cost of your power shifts as well. There's if for any of you who have watched my channel for a while, I've played a Feral Druid for a long time, and it's a challenging spec. You're not going to be going in and topping damage meters. You're going to be very sort of middle of the pack, I would say, and you're probably putting in a lot more effort than anybody else. There will be fights where you can absolutely be top DPS. But, I don't want to sell you a false dream. I think the top performing ferals will do very, very, very well. But the odds are the top performing ferals are going to be in top performing guilds where the other DPS also know their class, the intricacies inside out. So you will be able to keep up. I mean, when I'm DPSing, I've got really good people in this guild, good hunters, good rogues, good warriors, all different classes, and I can absolutely be in the top 3 on every fight. But it's not going to be like Wrath of the Lich King where feral DPS is top just more or less on every fight no matter what, because the bleeds are so OP. It will change over time, but obviously we're looking more at let's just try and keep our focus to what tier 4 raiding is going to be like, because all the classes are going to evolve over time. And who's topping the damage meters at any given tier is going to change from tier to tier. So, but yeah, feral DPS overall, absolutely. In 25 man, you'll probably want 1 in the group. In 10 man Karazhan, yes, you'd take feral DPS to a group if they're exceptional. But in all honesty, that spot could be filled with someone who either brings more group synergy or more buffs to the raid, or does more damage. So just my opinion. As I say, I'm not saying you're not going to get to raid as feral DPS, but I think their place is better suited in 25 man rather than 10 man personally. But again, that is just my opinion. So then balance. So Boomkin is still Still reasonably weak in TBC. It's better, and you can, with the right gear, and you need the right gear, you can put out some really good numbers and absolutely, keep up with mages. Maybe not warlocks, but they're strong. They're strong, and they do bring some good things. But again, I don't want to over exaggerate any of these classes. I want to be absolutely realistic, and you're never going to be top in damage meters, but you will bring a lot of utility that nobody else can bring, and you can literally just switch out on the fly and throw some heals around if one of your healers dies and there's no combat res available. It's all these things that they make or break a boss encounter. If you lose a healer on, let's say, Prince in Karazhan, and if you're 2 healing and the boss is on like 20%, 15%, something like that, and one healer dies, you can now just jump straight out of Boomkin form and start throwing some heals around and potentially save a wipe. So in that respect, they're absolutely worth bringing with raided 10-man with a Boomkin, because they do bring nice buffs, which we might as well get onto those now. So 5% crit, obviously, that alone is lovely. So Boomkin form, 5% crit for your party. So if you've got warlocks, mages, elemental shamans, whatever in the party, that's really nice. They also added the fact that you can get mana back from meleeing. You probably will use this occasionally, but it's pretty meh, to be honest. Just carry loads of mana pots and use mana pots rather than getting up close and personal with the boss. But they also, obviously, they don't suffer like a feral tank does. They can use their tranquility and rebirth and all of that good stuff just whenever they need to. They're a very reactive class. You've not got the restrictions of needing to come out of bear when you're tanking or anything like that, so that's always nice. Improved fairy fire. So I spoke about this on if any of you watched the TBC class change videos I've done. It's really good early on, and I've seen so many people talk about this on YouTube, and they really just sort of push it by the wayside and say, oh, well, no, everyone should be hit capped. But let's be realistic. If you're pushing into Karazhan in week 1, or even into Grawl in week 1, your odds are the majority of your raid are not going to be hit capped, because you just simply haven't had time to get the gear. So being able to give 3% hit to your melee and hunters is probably really, really valuable earlier on. I'm not saying, in 3 to 4 resets of Karazhan when everybody's hit capped without it. It's something that you'll drop out of your spec. But early raiding, if you've got a Draenei in the party as well, or a Draenei in each party, and a 10-man, and then you've got a Boomkin, it's 4% hit for everyone. It's pretty immense, really. So definitely shouldn't be ignored. Then, there's not a lot else. I mean, the one thing I would mention is Insect Swarm, but that's only for if you haven't got a hunter, which you will have hunters because they do crazy damage. But, 2% less chance to hit for the tank. That's really nice, but obviously Scorpid Sting is a lot better. But, potentially, if your tank's quite well geared or you're not too bothered about it, the hunter can use a different sting and you can just, benefit from the 2% hit or miss chance, if you want to call it that, from Insect Swarm. So, it's a possibility. And that's about it really for Boomkin. I mean, ultimately my sort of view on it is, that you're probably not going to see them in these super hardcore guilds, but they're going to be stacking warlocks and hunters. But in your regular guilds, you progressing at a good speed, getting the bosses down and everything, you'll definitely see Boomkins around. I mean, I would take a Boomkin to a raid, especially if I've got a quite a heavy ranged setup. Lots of mages, warlocks, elemental shamans, and I would absolutely put a Boomkin in there. And then finally the Resto druid. This is the only one I've actually got some gameplay for, so I'll just put a bit of Karazhan gameplay of Resto on while we're talking about it. They're solid, solid raid healing, solid tank healing, probably the most mana efficient healer in TBC, to the point where a Resto druid can absolutely get away with using their innovate on the other healer. If you're 2 healing Karazhan, you can have a Resto druid be so mana efficient that you can drop a 3rd healer and let that Resto druid innovate the other healer to keep him going. The Tree of Life form's awesome for the raid the tank group. So obviously it increases the healing received by people who have got the Tree of Life aura on them by 25% of your spirit. So the more spirit you gain, the better it gets. So over time, you're boosting the other healing, the other healers healing on the tank, by considerable amounts. It's very nice. You don't obviously suffer from the feral tank curse where you can't, just jump out and res and innovate and all that stuff. So obviously that's worth mentioning. And they're just solid healers. There's not. I don't want to talk too much about Resto Druids because they are strong. They're really strong early on. I don't think they're quite as gear dependent as Holy Priests, Holy Paladins, Resto Shamans, where they need lots of mana per 5. You're going to be trying to set sort of specific mana per 5 and plus healing goals that you want before you go into Karazhan. Resto Druids can go in really undergeared and just perform very, very well. So you'll have an easy time. You'll have a very easy time and expect to be topping healing meters quite often as well. Particularly on quite heavy raid damage where you can just throw life blooms around on absolutely everyone. But they're strong, in a great position. If you're gonna, if you're a healer and you're contemplating what healing spec to play, Resto Druid may be the one for you. And also, if you like PvP, they're insane in PvP. I understand this is not a PvP video, but it's just nice to be able to do two things in one spec. So overall, just to sort of summarise, the Druid brings a lot to the raid, and each different spec brings uniqueness to the raid. And I would say to the point where in a 25-man, you could quite happily have 4 Druids. You could have one of each in a 25-man and be in a good place. Because you're going to be getting 2 times leader of the pack on your melee groups. You're going to have 4 tranquilities. You preferably want all 4 of these in different parties. You're going to get 4 combat reses. There's lots of CC with Cyclone. There's a lot of benefits to having Druids in your raid. So if you are planning on going Druid, then you should be happy because you will be in a good place. You will be able to raid as whatever spec you want. As I say, there is the only... As coming from someone who's played Feral DPS for 15, 16 years, the only downside in this expansion is Feral DPS is you can do good numbers, and there'll be Feral DPS probably shouting at the screen at the moment while they're watching this, but there are classes that just bring more. They just bring more. They're more beneficial to the rest of the DPS. You can get the 5% crit from leader of the pack from the Feral tank, so don't necessarily need it from a DPS, particularly in 10-man, because you probably only have a couple of melee anyway that can be in the tank group if needs be. So, that is the only downside. But all the specs, perfectly viable, bring lots to the raid. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found at least some of it. Maybe some of it's new to you, or some of it you've just forgot because it's been a long time since TBC. And the next class I'm going to do is going to be Priest, and that's going to be interesting because Priests bring lots to the raid. And for those of you who watch me stream, I've been literally no life in a Priest for the last week. So, yeah, cool. Make sure you like, subscribe, and all that. Check out the giveaway, and I'll see you on the next one.